look at solving an inequality. I would go back, if you haven't already, or if you haven't seen the 1 and 2 step equation videos or like the multi-step equation videos, I'd go and check those out, because here's the main thing about solving an inequality. First of all, the first thing is we're going to solve these just like an equation. So solve just like an equation. So all the same steps still apply as solving an equation. Okay, we basically want to get the variable on one side by itself. But here's what you have to watch out for, and this is the really big difference between solving an equation and solving an inequality. When you solve an inequality, and I'd make sure to write this down, or at least, I don't know, put it in your memory bank. The inequality symbol, so inequality, I'll just say IQ. So the inequality symbol must flip. So must flip if you multiply / divide by a negative. So a negative number, and that's on both sides, okay? You can also make a little note and say on both sides, okay? So if you're solving an equation, that rule doesn't really apply because you have an equal sign. But when you have an inequality, if you multiply or divide by a negative, your inequality symbol must flip. So let's look at a few of these and then we'll come back to this. Or we'll actually go through these steps as we move. So let's start with the first one. 3x plus 2. Now, instead of equals, we're going to have less than -4. So our goal is still to get this x on one side by itself. So what you can do is go to your inequality and draw a line, and you can see there's the left side, here's the right side. Now, we want to move everything that's not x. That means to isolate x. We want to isolate x. So two things need to go. 3 needs to go, and 2 needs to go. If you remember, when we're solving an equation, or it actually carries over into inequality, as long as there's no big fraction, we want to get rid of this +2 first. So how would we get rid of +2? We would subtract 2. And remember, we want to balance everything out. So what we do to this left side, we're going to do to the right side. So we're going to subtract 2 over there. Now, 2 minus 2 cancels to give me 0. 3x comes down. Less than, instead of equals, once again we have less than. -4 minus 2 is -6. Now, hopefully you're saying, or maybe wondering, why didn't we flip the inequality? Here's why. I just subtracted by 2. I didn't multiply or divide. So if you don't multiply or divide by a negative, this inequality stays the same. So now we've still got to get x by itself. On the left side, we have x, but it's 3x, so we want to get rid of that 3. Remember, a coefficient is multiplied by a variable. This is actually 3 times x. So the opposite operation or inverse operation is dividing by 3. And we're going to do that to both sides. Now, we divided there, but 3 was positive. So this sign, this symbol, is still going to be less than. So now we have x less than -2 or -6 divided by 3, which is -2. So our answer, x is less than -2. Now, let's say you want to graph this. I've made a separate video about graphing, but let's just do it for the sake of doing it. Okay, so real quick, we have x less than -2. And we want to graph this on a number line. If it's already made for you, then you can just kind of fill it in where you need to. But I'm just going to make my own, and I'm going to start at -2. So less than that would be -1 and 0 and so on. Or greater than that, my bad. Greater than that would be -1, 0, and so on. To the left of that, which is less than, would be -3, -4, and so on. All right, so the first thing we need to decide is, when I put my first point at -2, should it be open or should it be shaded in? And in our case, it would be open, because no line under the inequality means no shading. Now, less than, should that go to the left or to the right? Well, if you take a look, all the values that are less than -2 would be to the left. That would be -3, -4, and so on. So this graph is going to point to the left. All right, let's look at another problem. Actually, let's find one where we're going to flip the inequality. So let's do this one. Let's say x over -8 minus 5 less than -2. Okay, so once again, our goal is to get x by itself. So we want to isolate x. It's already on the left side, so let's see if we can get rid of this -5 and this, or -8 and -5. So which one do we want to do first? Well, the only time we ever want to get rid of this -8 first is if the -5 is also on top of this fraction with x. I'll show you what it looks like. If it said x minus 5 all over -8, then you would get rid of this -8 first. But we didn't have that. We had this -5 outside of that fraction, so that's what we're going to get rid of first. So how would we get rid of -5? How would we make that 0? We would add 5. And we're going to do that to both sides. So now these two will cancel. -5 plus 5 is 0. X over -8 comes down. Our inequality comes down because we didn't even multiply or divide here, so we're still dealing with a less than sign, which I'm struggling to draw. Okay, there we go. Now, -2 plus 5 is just 3. Okay, so now here's a great example of when I get rid of this -8, it's actually going to flip this inequality, and look at why. So x over -1, well, that's just x divided by -8, or I may have said -1. X over -8 is actually just x divided by -8. So if I want to get rid of -8, I do the inverse, which is multiply by -8, and these two are going to cancel to give me 1, which gives me 1x or x. Now, what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. But pay attention, what type of number am I multiplying by? Negative. And the rule is, if you multiply, well, I'll just write the symbols. If you multiply / divide by a negative, then your symbol flips. Okay? So you have to flip your symbol, which means less than becomes greater than. And then we can do 3 times -8, which is -24. So there's my answer. Now, let's look at how to graph this just in case we need to see it. So x greater than -24. My graph, I can just label it myself. I will say, let's get rid of that. I'll say -24 is right here in the middle. To the right would be less or greater than. So that's -23, then -22, then so on. -25 is to the left, -26 is to the left, and so on. All right, so now, we're going to put our first point at -28, or -24. Jesus, I can't talk. All right, -24. Our first point's going to go there. Now, we have no line under our inequality. So no line means no shading, so it's an open circle, which means -24 is not included in this solution. Now, does greater than mean to the right or to the left? Well, if you look at your numbers to the right, they're all getting bigger. So my line or my graph needs to point to the right. All right, let's check one more. Let's have one that actually flips. Actually, maybe we'll do 2 more. Let's do one with a fraction. Let's do a couple with a fraction. Just because fractions are typically what give people the most trouble. Let's do 3 over 4 x plus 5 greater than 11. All right. Now, if you haven't already done this, I'd stop and pause this and see if you can figure it out yourself. Now, we want to see if we can get x by itself on one side. So we want to isolate x. Okay, so x needs to be isolated. So 3/4 needs to go, and so does 5. So which one do we want to get rid of first? Well, as long as there's not one big fraction, you want to get rid of +5 first. So you're going to subtract 5. Okay, then 3/4, x is left on the left, greater than, because we just subtracted, we didn't multiply or divide by a negative, 11 minus 5 is 6. Now, let's see if anybody remembers or if anybody knows, how can we get rid of 3/4? There's a couple different ways to do it, but there's one way that's really easy. Well, if you have a coefficient that's a fraction, you're going to multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, that would be the inverse. So if we multiply both sides by 4/3, these two fractions will cancel and leave you with 1x greater than, then we're going to multiply by 4/3 on the other side. Now, how come my fraction didn't flip? I mean, not my fraction, my symbol. How come that didn't flip? It's because 4/3 is a positive. So it would only flip, this symbol would only flip if the fraction or the number that we're multiplying by or dividing by is negative. So now, quick way to do this, if you don't have a calculator, 6/1 times 4/3 and divide your diagonals. The diagonals would be 6 and 3, which gives me 2. 2 replaces the 6, and then you multiply across the top and the bottom, which would give me 8/1, which is just 8. So my answer is x is greater than 8. All right, I'll skip the graphing on that one just because I've done it in some other videos. Let's do a couple more. Let me show you 2 more actually. I think I said only a couple while ago. Let me show you 2 more. My Achilles heel is doing too many examples, so why change it now? All right, so -5/6x minus 1 greater than or equal to 14. Now, let's try to figure this one out. So, at the equal sign, you'll see that there is 2 things that I need to move when isolating x. I need to move -5/6 and -1. I'm always going to move the plus or minus part unless there's one big fraction, and there's not one big fraction. It's just a fraction right here for this variable term. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. I did not need to make that so dramatic. There we go. Let me make it straight. There we go. Okay. Now, -5/6 is going to come down. X greater than or equal to comes down because we didn't multiply or divide by a negative. 14 plus 1 is 15. All right, all good there. Now let's go to the next step. How do we get rid of this -5/6? Well, same situation as last time. If you have a fraction coefficient and you want to get rid of it, multiply by the reciprocal. Now, my question to you is that negative included in the reciprocal? Yes, it has to be. So I can flip this to -6/5, but I must keep my negative. I can't just get rid of the negative or else these won't cancel to give me 1x. It would cancel to give me -1x, and we don't want that. We want 1x. All right, so these two will cancel to give me x. Now, watch what happens when I multiply on the right side. I'm multiplying a negative on both sides. That fraction is a negative, which means this symbol will flip to less than or equal to. And now, once again, here's an easy way to multiply fractions without a calculator. First, 15 is positive, this fraction is negative. So you know your answer is negative, because a positive times a negative is a negative. Then take 15/1 times 6/5 and divide your diagonals. 15 and 5 divide to give you 3. 3 replaces 15, then just multiply across the top and the bottom, and you get 18. So x is less than or equal to 18. And once again, I'm going to skip the graphing for this one. Let's do one more. I know you may be bored to death at this point, or maybe you skipped to get here. This is the last example I want you to see. x plus 11 all over negative 2 less than negative 2. Now, same thing. Look at the equal sign, or look at the inequality. We have a left side and a right side. Our job is to isolate x. So 11 needs to go and negative 2 needs to go, but here's the issue. Negative 2 is blocking us from moving the 11 off of the top. Since that 11's on top of negative 2 needs to move first. So we're going to multiply on both sides by negative 2. These 2's, the negative 2's, will cancel, and 11 plus, or x plus 11 comes down. But what did we say happens when we multiply or divide on both sides by a negative and there's an inequality? It flips. So even in this example, we multiplied first, but it doesn't matter. If we multiply or divide on both sides by a negative, that inequality symbol flips. Now negative 2 times negative 2 gives me positive 4. Now we're finished, or almost finished. We just need to get rid of that plus 11 by subtracting 11. And now we'll say that x is greater than 4 minus 11 is negative 7. Seems right? Yeah. So there's our answer. All right, so hopefully that makes quite a bit of sense. Once again, reach out if you need any extra help. Just remember the main takeaway you have to watch out for any inequality. Let's not do that. Any inequality is this. If you multiply, I'll actually do the symbols. If you multiply / divide by a negative on both sides, then your inequality, I'll just say IQ, has to flip. Okay?